Hello again. Well, one by one and inch by inch, God's people are getting closer to their homeland. And yes, they had some skirmishes in between with people that lived in the area, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Jesuites, the Moabites, stalactites, the Minibites. They had their troubles. But God helped them. God was with them, and they fought them off and won. And finally, they came to the Jordan River, and on the other side was their land. Now, the older generation that came out of Egypt had all died off. They died of old age, or they were killed, and they were the unruly bunch. But this newer bunch seemed to be more willing to follow the Lord than the old ones that still had an awful lot of Egypt in their blood. And the scriptures even allude to that fact. Even though God saved them all out of Egypt, they didn't all make it to the promised land. There's a verse that talks about that in the New Testament. Paul talks about it. Something to really ponder. And it's because they were following and had the outward works and everything. They still had a heart of Egypt in them. And that's something that we need to really think about. We might start out, oh, I want God and I want the promised land. But they fell in the wilderness. They didn't make it. So it's something for us to take pause in our lives. And Moses, who is now, his life is separated into three distinct parts. He grew up as a boy and a prince in Egypt with the world at his feet. He had everything at his disposal. He was rich, well-fed, well-educated. The next part of his life, he spent out in Midian as a shepherd. And now the third part of his life, he is a shepherd to God's people. So he's old and he's lived a full life. And he had a feeling that it was time for a new leader. He just kind of felt it in his spirit. And so he picked a young man named Joshua. And there was another man named Caleb. And it says, these two men had a different spirit in them. A spirit of wanting God above all else that's happened in their life. I'm sorry. And so Moses went and got Joshua, and he took Joshua to the now high priest, Eleazar. Reuben had died. Not Reuben, his brother had died, Aaron, and now Eleazar is a high priest. So he took Joshua before the high priest in the tabernacle tent, and there he told Joshua he was now going to take over. And then everybody recognized that Moses felt that he was going to die. God had told Moses that he would bring him to the promised land, but he could look at it, but he wouldn't cross over into it. And you know why? Because, and Moses knew this, it's because, oh boy, This is awful. I've grown to really like Moses. I'm sorry. Because he's the one who took his staff and struck the face of the rock in his temper to make the water come out. And God forgave him for that, but it has its consequences. It was like striking the face of Jesus Christ, because the scripture says that rock was Jesus Christ. So Moses started up into the mountain, and he walked higher and higher, and he could look over the Jordan River and see Canaan land out there. And he asked God to be with his people. I don't know why I get so emotional about this. I guess I fell in love with the guy. And anyway, it says in the scripture that Moses laid down and closed his eyes, crossed his arms over his chest, and he died. Now, when Joshua and Caleb came looking for him, they could never find him, and nobody ever found Moses' body. Nobody ever found it. And so now we're at another chapter, another book where they're starting to go. They're going to cross over with some new leaders and really some solid, good men who had good hearts toward God. They've been out in the wilderness for 40 years, and now they're going to cross into the promised land. I think that's all I had to say right now. It's all I can think of right now, except before they crossed over, one other thing. They had a terrible time with the Moabites. Do you remember the Moabites? The Moabites, remember Sodom and Gomorrah, and Lot and his wife were fleeing from Sodom and Gomorrah, and only he and his daughters made it because his wife, it says she hesitated. She really didn't want to go, and she got covered with the fire and the brimstone, and said she turned into a pillar of salt, and I think a lot of people did. So salty down there, all of that sulfur and everything. And so when Lot went up into the mountains with his daughters, he and one of his other daughters committed incest. And they got him drunk, and the one daughter bore him, her own father, bore him another child. And he named that child Moab. And Moab became a man who totally did not love the Lord. And the Moabites were an ugly, ugly enemy of Israel from that point on. Anyway, I'm blabbering on and crying and everything. But now Moses is gone, and Joshua, because Eleazar knew it too, the high priest, Joshua is now the leader, and they got a good new group of new people willing to follow the Lord at Joshua's command. Okay, see you next time. Sorry about the tears. Bye-bye.